All right, let's jump right into this explainer with a genuine, real-life mystery from World War II that completely baffled military sonar operators. Picture this. It's the early 1940s, right? Naval ships are out there, pinging the ocean depths to navigate and scan for submarines. But suddenly, they start seeing something entirely unexpected showing up on their screens. Something that, honestly, should have been physically impossible. So what exactly is the ocean's phantom bottom? Well, imagine pinging the deep ocean and detecting what looks exactly like a solid, impenetrable seafloor. But here is where it gets incredibly weird. As the operators watched their screens, they saw this massive, solid-looking mass mysteriously rise toward the surface as the sun set, and then sink right back down into the abyss as the sun came up. It was essentially a seafloor that breathed with the daylight.
In fact, naval records officially described it as a false ocean floor that shifted depths with the rising and setting sun, confounding early sonar readings. And this anomaly was so widespread, and honestly so consistently mapped, that navies genuinely thought they were discovering uncharted, shifting underwater mountain ranges or shallow shoals. They literally marked them on maps to avoid running their ships aground. But the truth, as we'd later find out, was far stranger and far more dynamic than any geological formation.
Which brings us to Section 1, the deep scattering layer. Let's look at what scientists eventually named this completely bizarre phenomenon.
Okay, so here's the crucial point. This wasn't rock or sand or secret submarine hulls bouncing those sound waves back. It was an unimaginably massive wall of living, breathing creatures. The sonar was physically hitting billions and billions of tiny swim bladders, the little gas-filled organs that fish use for buoyancy, and bouncing back. It created the absolute perfect acoustic illusion of a solid ocean floor. To actually track these creatures down and figure out why on earth they were moving, let's leave the sunlit waves behind and head into Section 2, into the twilight zone. Let's quickly compare the ocean zones here. The epipelagic zone is the warm, sunlit surface water we're all familiar with. It goes down to about 200 meters, and it's where vibrant plant life and phytoplankton thrive because, well, there's plenty of light for photosynthesis. But just below that lies the mesopelagic, or the twilight zone. Spanning from roughly 200 to 1,000 meters deep, this is a shadowy, alien realm where sunlight rapidly fades to pitch black. It is freezing cold and the pressure is intense. And this harsh, unforgiving environment, that is the true home of our phantom bottom. Which naturally brings us to Section 3, Biology of the lanternfish. Because the identity of the primary culprit hiding down in that dark zone, causing this massive sonar illusion, isn't some giant, kraken-like sea monster, it's actually a really tiny fish.
Trillions, and I literally mean absolutely trillions, of tiny creatures called lanternfish make up a staggering 65% of all fish biomass in the deep ocean. Just let that number sink in for a second. Over half the mass of all fish in the deep sea comes from this one specific group. It is this sheer, unadulterated density of tiny bodies that creates that solid-looking acoustic bounce on a sonar screen.
And their anatomy perfectly illustrates how evolution conquers extreme environments. They are super tiny, usually just a few inches long, but they have these disproportionately giant eyes to capture whatever faint, tiny specks of light exist down there. But more importantly, their bodies are covered in photophores, which are specialized light-producing organs. They use this bioluminescence to project light downward from their bellies, matching the faint downwelling light from the surface perfectly. It's an active cloaking device called counter-illumination, and it effectively makes them completely invisible to predators looking up from below.
Now, understanding how these fish create and manage their own light takes us into a really fascinating parallel with modern science. Generating and controlling photons isn't just a neat biological parlor trick, which leads us right into Section 4, the physics of light.
When we compare natural bioluminescence directly to artificial photon manipulation, we see that generating and controlling light is a pretty universal challenge. On the biological side, the lanternfish uses its specialized photophores and internal chemical reactions to emit precise wavelengths of light just to survive, hide, and mate in the dark. But on the physical side, human engineers are currently trying to achieve that exact same mastery over light using tiny engineered structures called microcavities to build better lasers and quantum computers.
In modern physics, researchers study something called light-matter coupling, where they trap photons in optical microcavities to fundamentally alter how light is emitted at the quantum level. But think about this for a second. Millions of years before human physicists built high-tech, multi-million-dollar labs to force light and matter to interact, our tiny lanternfish evolved their very own highly efficient biochemical microreactors. They completely mastered the emission of light purely through evolutionary pressure in the pitch black.
Okay, let's move from the microscale physics back out to the macro scale in Section 5, Earth's biggest daily migration. Remember how the phantom bottom moved up and down on those early sonar screens? Let's see how this incredible biology builds into a literal planetary scale event. That vertical movement is called the diel vertical migration. As dusk falls, trillions of lanternfish, driven by pure hunger, swim upward from the twilight zone right up into the sunlit epipelagic zone. Under the cover of night, they gorge themselves on carbon-rich phytoplankton. Then, right before dawn breaks, which would make them visible to predators, they retreat hundreds of meters back down into the dark mesopelagic shadows so they can safely digest their meal. Every single night.
When we think of massive animal migrations, we usually picture wildebeests sweeping across the African savanna, or maybe massive flocks of birds flying south for the winter, right? But the truth is, the largest synchronized movement of biomass on the entire planet doesn't happen on land at all. It happens vertically, every single night, right beneath the waves. It's a daily commute of epic, staggering proportions. But honestly, it's what they take back down with them on that commute that truly impacts every single one of us.
And this brings us to the most vital part of this whole explainer, Section 6, Driving the Carbon Cycle. Here is exactly why this massive invisible migration matters for the very air we breathe.
You can think of this as the ocean's biological pump. Step 1. Surface plankton absorb carbon dioxide from our atmosphere through photosynthesis. Step 2. Under the safety of night, our glowing lanternfish gorge on that carbon-stuffed plankton. Step 3. They swim back down into the deep, high-pressure twilight zone. And step 4, they digest and excrete that carbon in the depths. By eating at the surface and, well, pooping in the deep, these fish act as a giant biological conveyor belt. They are physically dragging immense amounts of carbon out of our atmosphere and trapping it in the deep ocean for centuries.
When you actually break down the data, it makes it incredibly clear just how critical this process is. While carbon absolutely does sink passively when marine life dies, the active transport, the sheer mechanical volume of carbon physically carried down by lanternfish and other mesopelagic migrators makes up a massive chunk of our annual oceanic carbon sequestration. They are literally the unsung heroes in regulating our global climate.
So, that terrifying phantom bottom that completely spooked WW sailors? It isn't a ghost at all. It is actually a vital planetary thermostat. Without the daily vertical commute of trillions of glowing, deep-sea fish, our planet's carbon cycle would be drastically thrown out of balance. It would leave vastly more carbon dioxide in our atmosphere and make our world considerably, dangerously warmer.
It's wild to think that we know so much about the surface of the moon, yet the ocean's twilight zone remains one of the least explored frontiers in all of science. If trillions of bioluminescent fish are silently controlling our climate from the dark, acting as this massive biological pump that essentially keeps our planet habitable, well, it leaves you wondering, what other planetary secrets, what other bizarre biology or physics-defying evolutionary marvels are hiding down there in the dark, just waiting to be discovered? Keep that in mind the next time you look out at the ocean. Thanks for exploring with us, and keep questioning the deep.